Bundle 2I is UN Resolution 194, December 11, 1948. And if I can invite your kind attention to page 4 of that bundle, at the top, my page nation. Page 5. This is what the General Assembly said in 1948, December. Resolves, that I'm reading from paragraph, on the left-hand side, paragraph 11. Resolves that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date. And so on. And that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return and for the loss of or damage to property, which under principles of international law and equity should be made good by the governments or authorities responsible. And then it instructs the Conciliation Commission to facilitate the repatriation, resettlement, and economic and social rehabilitation of the refugees. So this promise of the world community to the refugees at that time in 1948 remains unfulfilled and is the basis of one of the fundamental demands by the Palestinian people that they return home. And we heard how they still hold the keys to their houses until today. And they come out on demonstrations, they hold the keys to their houses. They showed Dr. Ang title deeds to their houses and so on and so forth. And this is one of the first resolutions, aside from the partition agreement itself, that this state of Israel has thumbed its nose at. It refuses to acknowledge its validity. So, 1948 for the Palestinians, they call it Nakba, which is catastrophe. For the Israelis, they trumpet it and celebrate it as an act of national liberation movement. Now, if I could refer to my ethnic cleansing at my page 10, it is equated with genocide in Russian and short. This is made very clear. But it's not just a question of the authors establishing this. If we look, and I invite your honors to look at Bundle 2E. Bundle 2E. Or is it 2E, attention to page 2716. This is a report of the report itself is at page 2684. It starts at 2684, and I invite your attention to page, I wish to quote from 2716 under the heading Ethnic Cleansing. So this is a UN report. The expression ethnic cleansing is relatively new. Considered in the context of the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia, ethnic cleansing means rendering an area ethnically homogeneous by using force or intimidation to remove persons of given groups from the area. Ethnic cleansing is contrary to international law. Based on the many reports describing the policy and practices conducted in the former Yugoslavia, ethnic cleansing has been carried out by means of murder, torture, arbitrary arrest and detention, extrajudicial executions, rape and sexual assaults, confinement of civilian population in ghetto areas, forcible removal, displacement and deportation of civilian population, deliberate military attacks or threats of attacks on civilians in civilian areas, and wanton destruction of property. Those practices constitute crimes against humanity and can be assimilated to specific war crimes. Furthermore, such acts could also fall within the meaning of the Genocide Convention. Then this final report says this, upon examination of reported information, specific studies and investigations, the Commission confirms its earlier view that ethnic cleansing is a purposeful policy designed by one ethnic or religious group to remove by violent and terror-inspiring means the civilian population of another ethnic or religious group from certain geographic areas. To a large extent, it is carried out in the name of misguided nationalism, historic grievances, and the powerful driving sense of revenge. This purpose appears to be the occupation of territory to the exclusion of the purged group or groups. And so there is high authority, in other words, commission of experts established by the Security Council that do equate ethnic cleansing with genocide. And of course, the report, aside from them, we have the December 1992 General Assembly resolution, which appears in bundle 2G. This is a General Assembly resolution 47/121, 47/121, 18 December 1992, which at my page 2794-2, with regard to situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, greatly concerned at the top of the page about the deterioration of the situation in the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, owing to intensified aggressive acts by the Serbian and Montenegrin forces to acquire more territories by force, characterized by a consistent pattern of gross and systematic violations of human rights, a burgeoning refugee population resulting from mass expulsions of defenseless civilians from their homes, and the existence in Serbian and Montenegrin controlled areas of concentration camps and detention centers in pursuit of the abhorrent policy of ethnic cleansing, which is a form of genocide. So we again have it repeated that these kind of activities, all of which we say our evidence has shown existed and exists in the case and continues to exist in the case of Palestine. Now if we look, there are others also we say, for example, this is a question of, it could be categorized as a settler colonialism. Settler colonialism, where people come to settle, as in Australia, for example, where they came to settle and drove the native population out, as in the United States of America, where persecuted individuals from Europe came and collected there, and then killed the native Indians. So that was settler colonialism. That is also inherently genocidal. The only difference between Israel and these other United States and Australia, for example, has formally apologized for its activities, right? And they allow the accommodation of these native Indians or the natives. They give them certain rights. There are even land rights that are given, and they are accommodated within the context of the Australian or the United States population and geographic vicinity. The difference with the settler colonialism that started in 1948 with Israel is that it continues and it is predicated on the expulsion, massacre, and termination of the lives of those settled colonies. And we heard Professor Ilan Pape say very clearly, he is a victim of Holocaust. His parents are victims of Holocaust. He's even grateful to Zionism for having saved his life. But not on the basis of creating another Holocaust in its place with respect to the indigenous peoples of Palestine. And that is the crux of the matter. And this settler colonialism, whether you call it ethnic cleansing or you talk about it in terms of settler colonialism, as does several authors, the most important of which is Nur Masala, who talks about this in terms of settler colonialism. The specific intent is to eliminate the national group. And it is, in fact, it is a structure, it's not an event. It's a structure, a continuing structure and not limited to the events of 1948. It's a structural construct that others must be exterminated, others must be expelled, and this is the game plan, regardless of all these maneuvers for peace talks and so on. That's why it doesn't result in anything. Right? And so we have, for example, as was for a while contended in Australia, that the land was pure and clean and they came in to settle. It was what they call a terra nullius. It was an empty piece of paper on which you could write a beautiful new poetry. But it was not terra nullius. And so Zangwill, for example, was talking about a land without people, for a people without land, suggesting that it is a terra nullius. Even Golda Meir is quoted as saying They, who are they? They, and I quote, they didn't exist at that time. So we have Nur Masala, who wrote the book, The Palestine Nakba, talking of the terms that were being used were about colonization and so on and so forth. And you see, the part is, and I come to my page 11, 1948 was an intensification of a pre-existing Zionist settler colonial project. So Nakba, which is a catastrophe, is a history of the present. It's ongoing possession. It's an ongoing Nakba, ongoing possession, dispossession, ongoing dislocation. So the continuity of the trauma is not just the result of 1948, but an ongoing process and continuing into the present, and linked to current Israeli settler policies and practices. That's why, they talk about the peace process, but even in the lands in the West Bank, there are settler colonies. We saw that map that was produced through Jawad, our witness, where you can see settler colonies, those triangular bits, hundreds of them, and a wall within the West Bank itself. So this is the point, that it is part of current Israeli settler policies to continue the dispossession, continue the dislocation. At the end of the day, you have a two-state which is being pursued. You have a two-state system. But where is that state, the West Bank? Where is it? There is a wall that has divided it. On its right side is Jordan, on its left is here. So what are we talking about? So this is the point. Genocide here hides behind expulsion, because sometimes people say, oh, it's only a question of expulsion. People were removed from here to go to there. From this room, you go to the fourth floor. That's not genocide. That's a removal, a transfer. But behind this ugly mask is genocide. These massacres continue and become them. And there are there's an Israeli leading human rights organization called B'Tselem. And they track this, and they say there has never been an end to the killing of Palestinians. And a small list, Pape provides a small list in his books, and so on. And so we come to Sabra and Shahira. So we heard the evidence of Shahira is here. And we heard the evidence of Dr. Ang. And we heard the evidence of Bayan Out. 3,500 Palestinians were killed. Now it is suggested that they were freedom fighters. I don't consider that a derogatory term, but aside from that, the fact is, if you look at the whole context in which it occurred, there were PLO fighters, of course. That's the only, at that time, respectable organization that was trying to advance the cause through every which way, including by armed struggle, because they were being killed. The only answer to those who are being murdered is to try to prevent that murder by trying to equate yourself, although the equation is so unbalanced, for a couple of rockets, homemade rockets, stones, and such like. And we heard, but the gruesomeness of it is just incredulous, because here we have these refugees who have arrived there from 1948 into this border outside of Palestine, in Lebanon. They've been living there from huts, from tents became mud huts, became semi-zinc and sometimes little brick houses as well. And they lived there. The PLOs were there as well to defend them, to seek recourse for the homeland. And then they moved out under a treaty, which was overseen by the United Nations. So all of them move out, evacuated, leaving behind the old, some young, some very young, mothers, children, left them there. And the understanding at that time of the treaty was that there would be peacekeeping forces, the Italians and so on and so forth, who would then protect those defenseless, because that was the condition upon which the PLO agreed to evacuate. And they all, mothers, some were sent to Tunisia, some to Syria, some everywhere. They were dispersed all over, leaving their wives and children behind. And they were prepared to do that, provided there was protection given to their kith and kin that was left behind. And then what happened? Suddenly, one day, and we can't attribute any blame to anybody, the peacekeeping forces moved out, and then they began to rumble the tanks of Israel to close off all, as we heard, all the exit points of this camp, this destitute camp that people lived in poverty. Alright? And the phalangists came in. And Israel has got its pretexts and moves that it chooses with great care. They're a very skillful nation in all this. They've survived this while, perhaps, right, because of that. And they used the phalangists because the president, the newly elected president of Lebanon, had just been killed. And so, of course, it's very easy to use that as a pretext. The phalangists came in, the Hadar came in, control decisions were made. The Kahan Commission report. Decisions were made, and I've referred to it at my page 12 by Defense Minister Ariel Sharon, Chief of Staff Aitan. They had declared in their meeting of the Kahan report makes it clear, there was a meeting without a full cabinet meeting where Menachem Begin, Defense, and Aitan took a decision. My colleague, Tan Sri Aziz, will be referring to it at greater length with regard to Amos Yaron. But in relation to genocide, this is in bundle 3, page 211. Now, after Sabra and Shatila, the Israeli government was under immense pressure to do something because it was a massacre that was condemned universally without any dissenting voice. And so they set up a commission under the chairmanship of Kahan. That's why it's called the Kahan Commission. And the findings of the Kahan Commission are most instructive. Right? If you look at page 12, B, Roman numerical 1. Defense Minister Sharon, Chief of Staff Aitan, declared on September 16, before the massacres began, that all of Beirut was under Israeli control. So they're all controlled, not just a question of Sabra and Shatila. All of Beirut was under Israeli control, and Sabra and Shatila is right there. Then secondly, there was a clear symbiotic relationship between Israel and the Christian forces, who are known as the phalangists of Kataib, assisted by the Israeli Mossad. Even the uniforms of the South Lebanese army and the phalangists were the same as those of IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and provided by Israel. This is the Kahan Commission. Israel saying this. The Israelis exercise some degree of control over the SLA, which is the South Lebanese army. The phalangists' plan to use force to remove Palestinians was discussed at several meetings with Israel, Kahan Commission report says. 3 key officials of the Israeli cabinet decided that the Israeli Defense Force would enter West Beirut at that time. He is the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, Chief of Staff. Aitan said that he and Sharon agreed on the entry of the phalangists into the Sabra and Shatila camps. The operational order provided, quote, searching and mopping up of the camps will be done by the phalangist Lebanese army. So this is the euphemistic word used. Searching and mopping up of the camps. That was the euphemism used for this massacre. And also, Kahan report summarizes the defense minister's instruction. Only one element, and they are controlled, only one element, and that is the idea, shall command the forces in the area. For the operation in the camps, the phalangists should be sent in. Should be sent in. So this is it. This is their instruction. The Israeli command post was located on the roof of a multi-story building about 200 meters southwest of the Shatila camp. Aitan and phalangist leader conversation is recorded by the Kahan Commission. Quote, be ready to take part in fighting. So there we have it. A very clear, complicit action of the Israeli in that whole operation itself, never mind about the specifics of where exactly they were located. Although we had Jamila Kaife talk about, We showed exactly, the transcript shows that they were right in the middle, right in the center of Sabra Shatila itself. And we also had Chahira talking about the fact that the Israelis, where they were located, and so on. Okay, and then of course Linda Malone, and we have quoted her in bundle 2H. She quotes the New York Times where they talk about purifying and purging, cleaning up, mopping up the camps. This shows unequivocally the intent of the Israelis at that time. So the camps were surrounded under the complete control of the Israelis. The Chief of Staff, Aitan, after acknowledging that the Phalanges quote had gone too far, still gave the thumbs up to continue the mopping up. Page 15. One of the few questions that emerged and influenced, or rather flawed, the finding of the Kahan Commission. Could the Israelis see from their command posts? Could they hear the killing from the killing fields, the gunfire, the screams? And I have here listed several aspects which suggest the testimony of Aung Sui. She said they went up to that so-called command post. First, the name command post. I mean, what is the purpose of command post? Command post is to command. And it is sitting right there at the time when these massacres are going on. And it was a command post of the Israelis. There is not a dispute. This is in the Kahan report itself. And Dr. Aung, together with others, went up there. They could see very clearly what was going on. It is in Bayan's book. You will see a map in Bayan's book of the command post. And you can see the whole spread of Sabra Shatila, the alleyways in front of you. And then, in Linda Malone's article, she has summarized the reports of journalists. Washington Post senior foreign correspondent Jonathan Randall, he said to say that they could not see from there, quote, is an obviously wrong-dated factual error. An Israeli journalist, Amon Kapeliov, in the Israeli newspaper Yediat Arnapot, he ridicules the finding. And Jonathan Randall of the Washington Post noted, and this I'm reading from Linda Malone's article, which is volume 2H at page 2995, and at page 2995, the last paragraph, Jonathan Randall, senior foreign correspondent for the Washington Post, noted, quote, in its only obviously wrong-headed factual error, the Kahan report insisted Israeli troops couldn't see into the camp's alleyways, even with giant telescopes on the command post roof. Journalists who climbed the 7-story building had no such difficulty with their own naked eyes, as Dr. Aung and her medics attest. Then, in the inquiry into a massacre, Sabra and Shatila, Israeli journalist Amnon Kapeliov discredited this within quote, serious mistake, based on his own visits to the site. Now, this is a Jew, Israeli. He says that a mass grave dug by the Phalanges southwest of Shatila, 300 meters from the roof, was clearly visible. The bulldozers allegedly used to bury hundreds of victims were also within view. And Kapeliov quotes the military correspondents of this newspaper, an Israeli newspaper, as saying that the Israeli army could not see what was happening under their nose, but knew, within quote, the exact street, building, and floor in Beirut on which every Fadaim leader lived, and knew the exact thickness of the walls around the Baghdad nuclear reactor, which is many miles away in Iraq. So he ridicules this. Then a New York Times article remarked that from the rooftop of the Israeli observation post, one could look down into the Shatila camp. This same article noted that from the Israeli observation posts, it would not have been difficult to ascertain what was happening in the camps, not only by sight, but from the sounds of gunfire and the screams coming from the camps. A radio report by Lauren Jenkins of the Washington Post says all things in his article, all things considered program, best summarize the opinion of eyewitnesses as to the visibility of the camps, particularly Shatila. Jenkins responded to the question, do you have any doubt now of the complicity of the Israeli Defense Forces there? Answer, there is no doubt in my mind that Israel aided and abetted that whole operation. The final proof to me was when I walked and found what was a mass grave in a part of the camp, that when you just stand just on top of that and you raise your head and you look up at a 7-story building about 300 yards away, which is the Israeli army's main observation post, a place where before their own advance into the city they had set up giant telescopes for spotting snipers. And as I stood there Saturday morning looking up, there were 6 Israelis looking straight down at me. They stood and watched throughout this whole horrible tragedy as people were brought here, shot, dumped in this grave, and packed up. Even Yaron admits that, and he was there at that outpost, according to the Kawan comment. Even he admitted that he could hear human voices. It's also reported in the New York Times. Yaron set up lookout posts on the roof of the forward command post. Right? Even though Khan Commission said he knew it was impossible to see very much, so he could see some, but not very much of what was going on. But he heard very clearly. And Laila Shahid, in the bundle 1, quotes an Israeli officer saying that watching from the roofs of one of the buildings occupied by the Israelis was like watching, quote, from the front row of a theater. So this was the spectacle. Sabra and Shatila. Shahira, we saw the photographs. If this is not genocide, as Bayan said, if this is not genocide, then I do not know what is. Bayan said. And we cannot see and understand that this is a massacre of major proportions. And I've come to the legal submissions where even one killing with intent, as a start of the rest of the killings, one body dead can amount to genocide in law. This is beyond doubt the specialized dollars, the specific intent established beyond doubt. Now, if we look then at how the world community reacted, if you look at Security Council resolution that was passed in response to this, and this is in my bundle, volume 1, at page 3, this is Security Council resolution 521 of 1982, 19th September, very shortly after this massacre. In fact, while the massacre was almost there, they condemned it as a criminal massacre. Security Council, criminal massacre. All right, it's very difficult, as we know, to get consensus in the Security Council because of the veto that the United States and some other countries have, those permanent members have. And of course, the General Resolution, the General Assembly Resolution of 16 December 1982, right, during the time this massacre was going on, and I refer to my bundle, volume 1, 5, page 5, and I'm reading from page 8, condemns in the strongest terms the large-scale massacre of Palestinian civilians. All right, this is at my page 8. It's under chapter D. Large-scale massacre of Palestinian civilians in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. Resolves that the massacre was an act of genocide. Now, this was voted upon. The condemnation of it being a large-scale massacre, 123 to 0 votes. Nobody voted against them. 23 abstentions.
Professor,
yes.
This morning we were invited to look at the law and at the law alone. May I ask you guidance on this? Is a General Assembly resolution law in the definition of law and international law?
If you look at my page 27, item G, my page 27, item G, I refer directly to this value of this particular resolution on Sabra and Shatila. If you are with me on paragraph G, it says considerable assistance in construing the scope of in whole or in part, and then a form of authentic interpretation or an indication of opinio juris of the states. So this is the opinio juris of states, which has credence and validity. It's a form of interpretation. How do you interpret that act? How do you ascribe and categorize that particular act? What does the world think of it, opinio juris? So this is a guide, if you like. It may not be strict law in the sense that we understand treaties, conventions, and domestic laws, but it gives a form of authentic interpretation. Now, so that is the value.